I hope by now that we have all learned to never trust anything that begins with breaking. And that does hold true for this post as well, as it has a rather imaginative interpretation of its original inspirational post. As it reads, the EU could seize X from Elon Musk to transform it into a public regulated platform promoting European decency. And considering the recent arguments between Elon and the EU, this does sound like something the most democratically unelected organization in the world could possibly put forward. And again, whilst the origin point is a pinch misleading, it is still worthy of a little bit of discussion in my opinion. So, the original post from this comes from Gunther Ferlinger-Jahn, who writes, "Shall EU expropriate Elon Musk and hand over X to a EU public foundation to serve as infrastructure for free public debate for free world based on European decency, morality, and reasonable regulations, and so safeguard..." English is not his first language, I assume. "This wonderful platform from ever more extremist Elon Musk." And the response has been rather beautiful, with 94.6% saying, "No, Austrian, we shall not be doing this." As indeed, this does come from the Chairman Austrian Committee for NATO Enlargement. God. Sometimes, like, it is beyond parody. And I checked, by the way, this is not a parody account, despite, certain signs pointing in that general direction, because as hard as it makes me to imagine any map that features Novgorod and Muscovy on it, this is mildly insane. And I think most of us probably can recall the last time that an Austrian decided to build an alliance in Europe. But oh well, details. So, this is not a member of the EU, he's not an EU representative or anything, he holds no public office whatsoever. He's a Austrian economist / political activist, and his level of influence appears to be, well, next to nothing. He's selling t-shirts for a living and runs a Patreon, which I don't know why, I just find particularly amusing considering the presentation at large here. But okay, the point itself then, which I want to return to, and yes, indeed it has very little to do with the actual opening post, but he goes on to say, here's how the EU could do it. Invoke the DSH hammer, the Digital Service Act, already lets the EU fine platforms up to 6% of global revenue for systemic risks, like misinformation or hate speech. X has been dodging fines, claims Musk's free speech tweaks amplify extremism, e.g. unchecked bots, election interference, escalate to imminent threat to democracy. This is, of course, an argument we've heard quite frequently over the course of the last 6 odd years. The threat to democracy. Donald Trump, the elected president twice over now, is a threat to democracy. Elon Musk owning X is a threat to democracy. All of the other platforms being vehemently pro-far left is not a threat to democracy. In fact, the literal left-wing echo chamber that is Blue Sky is receiving special treatment from the EU. That's how little of a threat to democracy it is. Step 2. Nationalize via public utility status. Argue X is now a critical digital infrastructure like telecoms or energy grids. Grid EU presidents exist. France seized telecom assets during crisis. Germany's nationalized energy firms for security. Pass a digital comms directive classifying social media as public good. Boom. Compulsory acquisition. And, you know, there's even a small part of me who's kind of like, Yeah, you know what? We probably should consider social media to be an essential part of infrastructure these days. If we are to hold on to our democracies, then the safeguarding of the public square must be of the absolute highest importance. Do I, however, believe for even a single solitary instance that the EU is the correct guardian of that public square? God, no. I mean, this entire thing begins with a person going, hey, should we seize billions of dollars of private property to protect European decency and morality? No, I don't think you should be given any power over anything. If your definition of morality and decency is the seizure of private assets, then you shouldn't have power. I thoroughly believe that if anything at all, we should do everything in our power to destroy and crush everything for which you stand. And normally, I'm a fan of NATO as a military alliance, but he's making a fine argument for its destruction if these are the people who support it. And by the way, this is one of those things where the European identity has become weaponized. Europe is not a country that tends to seize private property, not unless it's been severely manipulated or otherwise infiltrated by extremist ideology. It is, however, a very European, as in a EU, ideal. Step 3. The Expropriation Playbook. Use Article 17 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. Properties can be seized for public interest with fair compensation. Value X at 50 billion post-Musk value dip. Offer Musk 20 billion EU bonds. Debt plays or refuse. Course in Luxembourg enforce it faster than a Cybertruck recall. So, this is also where it gets interesting, right? The EU is, of course, a very large, very technically powerful entity, and it has been able in the past to force various companies like Apple and Google to pay out fines numbering in the billions of dollars for various violations that it itself has decided that the companies have committed against the EU. Now, the problem there, of course, is yet again that they literally create the rules, judge the breach of the rules, and then also enforce those breaches of the rules as well. And since most of these companies don't want to risk losing access to a market as massive as Europe, they simply just swallow the fine and play along with it. With something like X, however, we are beginning to hit a little bit of a tipping point here. With recent rebellious and even indeed government overthrowing activities or being denied access to social media, we might very well be in a position where companies like Apple have actual power over supernatural entities like the EU. Imagine, for example, if Apple decided, we're just gonna not release any products in Europe anymore. We're just gonna refuse service to everyone in Europe. What if Elon Musk simply pulls out Starlink and so on? These are all going to be rather significant sticks that can be wielded against the European Union as Europe continues to fall further and further and further behind in the tech race, due largely to EU regulations strangling any and all forms of innovation in Europe. And considering the fact that you have people arguing for just it's important now, we're just going to take it away from you, why would you ever even consider building a major tech firm in Europe? You would have to be insane, frankly. And what does European decency look like? AI moderators flag hate like climate denial or anti-vax rants as extremism. Mandatory civility scores for users, low scores, shadow ban city. EU legal cover build on the Musk menace. Dossier compile evidence, X role in 2024. Election chaos amplified far-right voice in France. Germany polls tied to GDPR violation, data privacy lapses and DSA non-compliance. Presents EGC to X under Musk endangered single market's moral fabric. Judge accepts it and starts to censor Twitter. Now, that is actually an disturbingly realistic thing as well, because whilst the idea of the EU outright seizing X is in and of itself a little preposterous, like, what are they going to do? Somehow I doubt that X's primary data centers are located in Europe, and even if they were, surely Musk would have plenty of time to, take measures to get rid of them or move them, simply. And, God, if he hasn't done so already. They can't simply take over X, they have no ability to do so. And even if they did, would people still stay on the official EU site? Probably not. But the idea, however, of enforcing censorship regulations on the internet is a currently unfolding and ongoing conflict, where right now the world is essentially attempting to find out who exactly gets to police the internet. For the longest time, nobody really wanted to mess with this due to the obvious unpopularity of it. But with the left becoming ever more marginalized, they're also becoming ever more extreme and willing to commit ever greater ridiculousnesses to maintain what power they still have. And the only way they've ever had authority is in essence to appeal to the authorities and the institutions to create artificially enforced echo chamber bubbles where the big stick is utilized against their opposition. This is what happened on Facebook, what happened on YouTube, what happened on all social media platforms until Elon stepped up and bought X, introducing the very first actually neutral platform in, well, recent internet history. This eventually also scared all of the other platforms with growing and mounting irrelevancy until they also began loosening their censorship control. But the supranational really, entities like the EU, of course, don't want this. They are still owned primarily by progressive elements. They still know that their politics are becoming ever more unpopular. Uncontrolled immigration is known as a near universal evil across the entirety of the civilized world at this point. We are on the very edge of viewing it as one of the greatest betrayals since the Second World War, okay? It is not a very popular position, and the only way to maintain its integrity then is to yet again artificially enforce rules upon the public square to make it appear as if the position still maintains some semblance of relevancy. And as long as X exists, that is simply not possible. At the current state of affairs, well, the best case scenario, honestly, is that the US preempts the other superpowers in enforcing some form of rules on how the internet is allowed to function and how speech is allowed to be presented and used on the internet. As at the end of the day, these companies' power are very limited compared to that of national entities. Yet again, our best bet is some sort of literal Bill of Rights for the digital space, but yet again, as there are no borders on the internet, this must somehow be enforced by a national entity. And we all hope it's going to be the US, but the EU, of course, wants it to be itself. So, this will also, of course, lead to a massive increase in their own propaganda. They say here, balanced discourse, 60% EU-approved narratives. 60%? Oh, I don't know about that. 80 or 90, maybe. So, this is going to be an evolving topic, I think, as there are absolutely forces within the EU that is salivating at the very idea of this. They view X, as the boomers they are, as a platform that is simply popular because it exists in a popular form. They know that building their own alternative is simply not a feasible idea, just like everybody else knows that building an alternative isn't going to work, particularly one built around the left-wing progressivist bias. Blue Sky tried that, and it failed miserably. to the point where it's still receiving countless special privileges and perks in the hope of keeping its shambling corpse alive, at least some semblance of alive anyways. Building new platforms is virtually impossible because the audience already have their platform. Thus, the seizure of an already existing platform is demonstrably and provably the best way to shift the public narrative, as that is exactly what Elon Musk did with the purchase of X. And one can think all kinds of negative things about Elon. Has he been perfect? No. Is his own agenda ideal? God, no. Is he a bit of a green idiot on many occasions? Absolutely. But one cannot deny that he has done more for the case of free speech than quite literally any other private individual currently, and it is largely due solely to his acquisition of X. To see that fall back in the hands of the EU, of all people, would be an absolute, genuine, utter disaster. And I do hope they'll never actually brought up seriously, but I already guarantee you, despite responses like this, there are a lot of EU bureaucrats nursing massive hard-ons for the idea, at least. But I suppose that is a black pill for another day. We're hopefully a few years away at least from utter cyberpunk dystopia. Maybe we'll even be able to develop some augments before we really get to full-on Night City. We can but hope. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Then, have a good day.